Good morning and welcome to Emerald Ash Borer University. I'm Robin Osborne from Michigan State University and a coordinator of this webinar series with Amy Stone of the Ohio State University Extension and Jody Ellis of Purdue University. Today's presentation is entitled Preparing for EAB in Community and Urban Forests and is presented by Amy Stone, Extension Educator and EAB Outreach and Education Coordinator. Numerous communities have been hit hard by EAB infestations, and what they've learned can help other communities prepare for this pest. So Amy will be giving that presentation. Continuing education credits will be available for this session, and we will give you specifics as to acquiring those credits at the end of the presentation. If you need verification that you attended this webinar for other purposes or self-reporting, please indicate that when emailing the request. I have been asked to announce that ArborJet is hosting 2 similar webinars next week for city foresters, arborists, and city stakeholders. Guest speakers are from Richfield, Minnesota and Rochester, New York. Go to www.arborjet.com for more information. Feel free to type your questions and comments into the chat feature on this webinar screen. Your questions will be written down, and to keep the presentation moving, Amy will be answering any questions after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later today. Go to www.emeraldashborer.info to find a URL for the recorded webinar. Thank you for your interest today, and please feel free to email me with your thoughts about today's presentation. We always like to hear if these sessions are helpful and any other input you'd like to offer. And with that, welcome, Amy, and feel free to start your presentation.
Good morning. As I sat down and decided how to cover today's topic, I really wanted to address different areas that communities may have to deal with when it relates to emerald ash borer. Those areas include the street trees, those trees between the street and the sidewalk and the public right-of-way. But there's also trees that fall within other public areas such as parks, right-of-ways, and then also some communities are dealing with or addressing the private trees that are on private property, but also could become a hazard or impact others within the community. And so as I was putting this together, my own objective is really to share the resources that are already out there and available, and the message that people that have dealt with emerald ash borer are really willing to share their success stories and maybe their failures and how to improve. And so if you're in a community that maybe hasn't been hit by emerald ash borer or just are in the infancy stages, don't feel as if you need to create a whole new program or a whole new plan, but rather seek out the assistance of others that are out there, individuals with the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Agriculture, your local extension offices, and learn through their experiences and really localize and adapt a plan that will meet your own community needs. Communities are very different and will really all address their EAB issues differently. We're just having a little issue with the advancement of the slides. 1 second. There we go. Just to remember, again, if you want SAF or ISA credits, if you email me at the end and I will put up some additional information. There we go. All right. So again, just to kind of relate those session objectives today, we're going to talk about different trees within the urban forest, including the street trees, public areas, and those on private property. If you've heard a session from me before, I typically like to include this particular quote, that everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. And it's important, and as participants in Emerald Ash Borer University and maybe people that are getting fact sheets and bulletins directly from the researchers, they have the latest and what I call the greatest information on emerald ash borer, and that helps in determining what your plan is going to be. And so it's that time equals research and research equals knowledge. And the more time that goes by, the additional knowledge and information that's gained by that very important research that's being done. All right, so we all know when emerald ash borer arrives on the scene, really bad things happen. And it doesn't matter if those ash trees are street trees, landscape trees, trees within a woodlot or within a park. Emerald ash borer equals millions of dead trees and counting. And so learning from the experience of others, the good and the bad, there are many success stories as it relates to the management of emerald ash borer and outreach efforts in communities, but there are also some things that we've learned along the way. This picture is of Dr. Dan Herms working with one of the sisters at St. Francis on an emerald ash borer plan on their property. It was a collaborative effort between the Department of Natural Resources, early on the Department of Agriculture, to go in and kind of establish what they wanted as an end result for the trees among and around buildings, but then also in kind of the natural areas. And I was just there this week and proud to announce that they have put in a lot of plants, additional trees around their property, and really have a diverse forest. And I'll show a photo of that a little bit later in the presentation. But another kind of take-home message, if there are trees that are going to be removed as part of your emerald ash borer community plan, hopefully there is a portion of the plan that will talk about replanting and reforestation. So when we talk about management options, there are really three primary options that people can choose from. And one is to do nothing and kind of let nature take its course. The second is the removal and hopefully replacement of the canopy. And the third is persistent insecticide treatments. It's important to know that you don't have to just do one of these three options. And in fact, many communities will use a combination of 1, 2, and maybe all three. The management plan should really include everything that's being done as it relates to the urban canopy in your community. You really need to include others in the development of the plan and get that buy-in at that local level. It's important to communicate to the residents that you have a plan in place, and you want to share that plan by posting it on a website, making it available at different identified locations. And as you go through, take a look and update that plan as needed and communicate those changes to the public. It's really important to get that buy-in that your community has a plan and is being proactive as it relates to emerald ash borer. And by engaging volunteers, either members of a tree commission, maybe master gardener volunteers or certified volunteer naturalists, they can help communicate that message to others around the community. An upcoming program that we're going to do as part of Emerald Ash Borer University, that session is actually going to be on May the 12th, is called NAB, or Neighbors Against Bad Bugs. And it's a program that was developed by Purdue, and Jody Ellis is going to share during that session all about NAB and how you might be able to replicate those efforts in your own community. As just an example, in NAB, they actually work with the local residents as well as other established extension volunteers where they're identifying trees in their community. You can see here where they've actually tagged the trees for a particular event and are looking for not just emerald ash borer, but other invasive species. Your community may also want to develop or use an existing display and replicate that. That could actually kind of be moved through the community to talk about your actual management plan. And so it can talk about emerald ash borer, identification, signs and symptoms, but how your community is addressing the impact of the insect locally. Great places to kind of put it on tour include libraries, government centers, town halls, just a way, again, to reach an audience that may have not otherwise heard about emerald ash borer. There are a lot of kind of giveaways and outreach items that have been developed. And if you're from a state or even just a town that has some dollars available to produce outreach items, I think the states that have developed these items are more than willing to share files that they could be changed and updated so it's specific to your individual community. Know that the emerald ash borer identification card, there is actually a regional one that's been developed through USDA APHIS and now the Forest Service, and those are available for use in your own communities. Signs are a great way to get the word out. It's amazing, this do not move firewood, stop the emerald ash borer. The urban foresters in Toledo, in Ohio, did a tremendous job working with their Tree City communities to distribute these at the Tree City Awards, probably 3 or 4 years ago. And the communities across Ohio have put those up near the entrances or maybe a particular area within their community that gets a lot of traffic. So spreading the message about emerald ash borer, the messages about buying local and burning local firewood, just the awareness of the ash trees in the environment, in the community, and the impact that emerald ash borer will have. Although some states are not using the purple traps anymore, typically the ones that are pretty infested, the purple traps have actually been an amazing PR tool as it relates to emerald ash borer. A couple years ago, I had a phone call into my office from a AAA office wondering if I could answer a question regarding the purple traps. Somebody was traveling on along State Route 71. They had called in their local AAA office to see if they knew what these were. It's amazing. I would have never thought to call AAA with that question, but we were able to get that information. And so the purple traps are very visible. They draw attention. So if you're from a state that is still using the purple traps as a detection or monitoring tool, if including media along with your EAB plan as the traps are going up or being observed or taken down in the fall, again, it's just another way to get the word out about emerald ash borer. The Forest Service and APHIS are spending a lot of time and energy on the message about not moving firewood, and if that can be tied into your community plan, that's always another positive. Lots of different items that are available, again, to increase awareness and spread the word about emerald ash borer. This is the new marketing piece that Sharon Lusick with the USDA APHIS is promoting during Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week. So check with your state's Department of Agriculture to see if any of those are available. Kind of a cool thing that is kind of the new outreach tool that's out there. And as participants in Emerald Ash Borer University today, you're one of the first to see these Emerald Ash Borer silly bands. The silly band company is actually a Toledo, Ohio company, and we worked with them to create these packages. And so they had the D-shaped exit hole, the tree and the baseball bat, and then we actually had custom images of the beetle and the larvae made, and they're packaged in these plastic packages. And as you're participating today, if you're interested in seeing a free sample and learning more about how silly bands might be an outreach opportunity in your community, just send me an email and I can distribute those for you. So when you go back to the management plan and you have that team around the table that is working to develop that for your community, probably the first thing that you'll want to work on is where are the ash in my community? Some may already have an existing tree inventory. Some communities may have a tree inventory that really maybe needs to be updated, the trees revisited. You could measure the size of the trees. At this point, too, if you're thinking along the lines of wood utilization, you may also want to take additional information about the trees, so you have those details, that information, as emerald ash borer moves in and you're contemplating different utilization opportunities. You can also indicate the overall health of the tree. Look for additional pest threats that may be on the tree, some of the native insects, the native diseases that we deal with in our ashes. You also may look at other issues kind of environmentally related. So if we've had a drought, are the trees stressed for that reason? Are they healthy, or are there other issues? And once you're out there, it's important that we identify the ash trees and know what's at risk for the emerald ash borer. It's really important to realize what other trees we have in our communities. And that really plays into that, especially if your community decides that you're going to do kind of a removal and replanting option. Because as you replace the canopy, you want to make sure that it's a very diverse canopy. So if you look at your percentage and maybe your maples are a very high percentage, when you decide what plants to replace the ash, you want to choose other types of trees and potentially shrubs in some situations. We hope, we have our fingers crossed, that we don't have to deal with Asian longhorn beetle, but if that were ever to kind of be in our communities or on the horizon, maples are their favorite. And I think one of the lessons that a lot of our communities learned in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, as they took an inventory of what was in their community, they had a lot of ash, but I think they had more acer or more. There are different fact sheets that states have developed to actually identify and help both residents and maybe people in your community that are pitching in towards this effort that maybe aren't as familiar with trees as you are. And so this is just the Ohio's version of Are My Trees Ash, but there are other resources that are out there that can be duplicated and passed out to those staff professionals as well as volunteers in the community. This is a photo of some of the volunteers that are actually working on campus at The Ohio State University to try to get the Tree Campus title. And so as they're doing that, they're going through inventorying trees. And so it's something that they're doing on campus, but you can do in your own communities. This group of volunteers, we were gearing up for Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week. And one of the things that we like to do was to show people the number of ash trees that are in the community. And they did this by following the inventory that the community had. They updated that by measuring the trees while they were out there. And then on each of the ash trees within this certain community, they actually put signs up that illustrated that, warning, this is an ash tree and it's at risk for being infested by the emerald ash borer. We got some good comments from the community, just the general public that said, you know what, we didn't realize how many ash trees were in our community, and it was a way to kind of get them aware of what was going to happen, and if treatments weren't made, that the trees would be lost and removed from their neighborhoods. There are some trees, as you do your inventories around the community, that if you're deciding to, hey, you know what, part of our plan is to treat and try to maintain an existing canopy of ash, maybe there's some plants that we wouldn't want to invest into. This one may be difficult to keep alive. Obviously, you'd have to, there's not a lot of soil there to do a soil drench, so you'd actually have to get the insecticide into the tree directly. But is this a tree that we should invest, or is it really not a good spot for a tree? The other thing to look at as you're inventorying the trees are other pest problems that ash trees may get. You can take photos, you can document this. Not to say that these trees, shouldn't be treated or shouldn't be considered as part of an insecticide management program, but if you're picking and choosing maybe the top 10% or the top 20%, depending on what your committee decides on for chemical treatments, you may want to choose the ones that are really healthy to begin with and don't have other pest pressures. The other thing I want to mention is this is a kind of a feel-good side of the emerald ash borer and the work that's being done out in the field to collect ash seeds, and know that that can be part also of the whole inventory, indicating, especially if you're doing some work in the fall, if the tree has a heavy seed load that potentially could be visited or revisited to collect ash seeds. I was at a program last Wednesday with somebody who works very closely with this ash seed collection, and he indicated that a lot of seeds that they were receiving actually were being infested by a seed weevil. So he was urging people to, when they collect the seeds, to actually look around the seed at the very end of the seed here, and it's almost like a pin-sized black speck that you'll see. And you could actually even rip into the seed, and the timing is just perfect. You would actually see the larvae feeding on the seed. And he said, it's not worth time or people's time to actually send those seeds in, because they wouldn't germinate and they wouldn't be part of the seed collection. And so he was kind of urging people out in the field to look and make sure that they are sending in viable seeds to kind of help with those efforts. And so you can go to ashseed.org and collect the data sheet. There's information on how to collect the seeds, so some really good resources out there that maybe your community would like to include in their emerald ash borer management plan. As you have your trees identified and are just trying to figure out, okay, how much money do we have in our forestry budget to spend on a yearly basis, and how can that be divided to maintain the current services that we're providing, but then also deal with emerald ash borer? As you kind of work through that to see what the cost would be if your community decided just to remove trees, or a combination of removal and insecticide treatments, or all insecticide treatments. Cliff Sadoff at Purdue has created this emerald ash borer cost calculator. The link to this site will actually be on emeraldashborer.info tied to this recording, but there'll be a list of other connections that you could make. But if you want to see it right after this session, any search engine, and just put in emerald ash borer cost calculator in Purdue, and it'll take you right to the site. And so it talks about those three options that I mentioned earlier: treating the ash trees with an insecticide, removing ash trees, and then removing ash trees and replacing them with resistant trees. So it was a great tool to help you figure out kind of a cost-benefit analysis of that. Another thing that I'd like to mention is the iTree software that the U.S. Forest Service has created along with Davy Tree. If you have maybe just a basic kind of Excel type spreadsheet that you're keeping track of the trees in your community and kind of want to upgrade to that next step, or if you don't have a current tree inventory and are just kind of looking to see what's around, iTree might be a possibility for you. The one thing that I really like about iTree is the ability to look at individual trees or entire communities of trees and actually have the benefits of those trees be communicated. Fortunately, I think sometimes when we deal with invasive pests like the emerald ash borer or other diseases or insects, some people may get kind of a bad taste about trees and think, why are we investing in trees when there's all these bad things that could happen? And realizing that we all love trees on this conference or this WebEx on this conference call, and that wouldn't be us, but we probably have worked with people that kind of question the importance of trees. And while we can communicate that clearly to them, iTree can actually put a dollar value to those trees. And so it might be something that you'd want to look into and explore. The Forest Service does do training if you're interested, and in fact they're doing some training beginning next week on a new part of iTree, which is the invasive species detection portion. So check out the website for additional information on that. The other thing that I think is really important to consider when developing your management plan for your community is there will be some trees that will succumb to emerald ash borer. And not all treatments will be effective on all trees, and there are a lot of different reasons why sometimes treatments do fail. But realize that even with best of intentions, there will be some trees that will die because of emerald ash borer, either between the streets and the sidewalks, in your parks, in woodlands, or in the residents within your community. And how is your area going to deal with this huge potential problem of all this wood waste? And if we can think kind of on the positive and be proactive, there may be some ash wood utilization options. And Jessica Simons has done programs for Emerald Ash Borer University, and so if that interests you, I would urge you to see one of her recordings or check out the website just to get some great ideas. She's also working with other states like Wisconsin, Illinois. Ohio's doing some things with wood utilization, some really success stories that are happening, some stories that schools and communities are partnering together with a local furniture company to build portable cubbies and bookshelves for the new schools in the Cincinnati area. We've actually had a company come up in Ohio that is using reclaimed wood, ash, and others to build all wooden caskets and urns. And so there's just these really kind of cool things that are happening as it relates to this increase of wood in the environment. And it's kind of making lemonade out of the lemons that were handed. So let's talk about the 3 types of trees the community will probably be dealing with. And we have our community trees and public right-of-ways along the streets and the sidewalks. Those typically are very easy to identify, and there are teams that can do kind of a drive-through in some of the areas, great walk to get out and have somebody, be the measurer, somebody recording the data, others identifying the actual trees. This just illustrates if nothing is done, especially if you're in an area that does not have emerald ash borer. This was taken from up in a bucket truck, one of the city of Toledo's streets that they unfortunately had to remove. And this is the same street, just looking at the opposite end. And again, lots of money and time was invested into removing these dead and dying trees in Toledo, and the impact that it's having on the communities is becoming very obvious. And so take a look at your existing streetscapes with ash. Yes, this is a beautiful monoculture. I mean, everything is very uniform, and you can't deny that. But hopefully we'll learn our lesson and really have some more diversity in our urban forests. I just want to bring your attention to this document that's on the screen that's available through the emeraldashborer.info. It's also on the ashalert.osu.edu website, and many other people have linked to it. It's the Coalition for Urban Tree Conservation, and it's an emerald ash borer management statement. And just a little background information on that. In the early days of emerald ash borer, when there were eradication efforts happening, there was a message that we got out loud and clear as far as the communication folks that insecticide options were not 100% effective and weren't part of these eradication efforts. And so the message about maybe was kind of misunderstood. The insecticides didn't work as part of the eradication, but they could indeed keep trees alive. But unfortunately, they could also keep low populations, which wasn't kind of part of the puzzle when we were talking about eradication. And so that message really was heard loud and clear, and even after the eradication efforts stopped, there were still residents that were saying, hey, I heard that insecticides don't work, or we're not supposed to treat our ash trees for emerald ash borer. So, we tried to get that new message out that, okay, eradication efforts have ceased, and people are responsible for the health and the well-being of that ash tree, or if it becomes infested, the removal and disposal of that tree. And still there were some people that didn't get that message. And so this group worked together to develop this statement that their idea is to really work on those key trees, those very healthy trees within communities, to maintain an existing ash canopy rather than just going through and clear cutting large areas at a time. Again, it's going to vary from community to community, and your community will have to make that decision on what's going to work for them, and potentially using that tree calculator that Cliff has developed may help you through that process. But know that information is out there, and really should take a look at it and become more familiar with that message that they're trying to communicate. If insecticide options are part of your management plan, either in the community or if there are residents who really want to save and protect ash trees on their own property, a great resource that they should have at their fingertips is this insecticide options for protecting ash trees from the emerald ash borer. Again, there are multiple states that have collaborated on this, and it's funded through the North Central IPM, the actual printing cost to get that out into the public. It is available as a link on a lot of the different websites, so just make sure that people are aware that it is out there and it's the latest research information. Next, let's talk about some ash trees that are maybe in more public areas. This is a community where the ash trees were in between the driveway and parking lot area and a ball field. And ash trees, although they look pretty healthy, are infested, and we're actually showing signs of emerald ash borer even down into the main trunk, where we were seeing some bark splits and cracks as well as some D-shaped exit holes. And so identifying these trees, and sometimes that's a little more difficult because you have to identify where all the public areas are in your community. But again, engaging volunteers to help in that process would be a good thing. These ash trees are a little more obvious. They are infested, but again, they're in the kind of the main entrance of the park where people would be walking through to get to ball fields and tennis courts and other public kind of areas behind the trees. And so ones that would definitely need to be addressed, and in this case, probably be removed. And then also in our public areas and our parks and natural areas, there are often ash trees that maybe are in areas that really the public isn't in. If they would fall, wouldn't cause really any damage. If this was just a woodlot, some of those trees probably would just kind of let nature happen, and they would fall over and kind of become part of that environment. But notice that there are power lines that come through. So I included this photo just as an example. You may want to talk to and work with your utility companies. Because in some cases, they'll actually come through, remove the tops of the trees, kind of leave the totem pole trunk underneath. So obviously you won't have any power issues or restoration issues if the trees were to fall over or when they do fall over. Other trees that you'd want to identify, trees near parking lots, trails near buildings, and prioritize, again, either treatments or removals depending on the stage of the infestation or where you're at. Just a message that as I've been talking to some of the parks around Ohio and in other states, some lessons learned. Early on, the metro parks of the Toledo area actually closed one of their metro parks totally as they were trying to deal with the removal of infested ash trees. And they received really a lot of backlash from the community because their park was closed. And so they, I know, have changed their approach and will communicate this to anybody who's listening, that they're now closing areas by trails or portions of the park, but they would never probably close an entire park again. Early on, they used kind of ash tree removal in signage and verbiage that they used in media, and they've changed that to include hazard tree removal. Again, it's just a slight variation in the words, but it seems to be accepted by more visitors because it is a hazard and addressed accordingly. The other thing some of the metro parks have been showing me that they've been developing is kind of a timeline or a brochure with the story of how they're dealing and preparing with emerald ash borer. And I thought that really works out well even in your community as part of your management plan. Maybe your residents don't want to read a 5, 10, 15, 20-page management plan depending on how far in depth you want to get. But they might be interested in kind of reading just a brochure of telling kind of highlights of what's happening as it relates to emerald ash borer in your community. Five Rivers Metro Parks in Dayton actually created a business card size piece that they're passing out to their visitors that talks about their management plan, their seed collecting, the insecticide treatments that they're making on some of the high-valued trees, the ones that have the larger trees that really make a difference in their parks or their open areas. And then also they're talking about their reforestation plans, their kind of adopt a seedling program that they're doing this summer. So just communicating what's happening, making sure that people know the latest information is very important. The other thing that communities are having to deal with beyond just the emerald ash borer and the loss of the ash trees, but are these open areas when ash trees are removed. And what is more inviting than another invasive species like an invasive plant like honeysuckle, buckthorn, multiflora rose, garlic mustard, you name, what invasive species you're dealing with as far as in the plant world goes. And typically if they're in the area and have this wide open space now that has sunlight penetration to the forest floor, they're going to be the first ones in there and be very aggressive. And so a lot of the management plans also will include specific details in these more natural areas about how they're going to manage for these invasive plants and how maybe they're going to plant seedlings or other native trees or shrubs. There was a photo that I noticed once out of Michigan where it was a forest that had a high percentage of ash trees. And the ash, disappeared, some were removed, some were still standing dead. But the understory was just this dense thicket of honeysuckle that really was never going to be created or developed into a forest again. It was all going to be this kind of shrubby mess, so they had to deal with the management of that. And finally, we're just going to talk briefly on identifying neighborhoods and volunteers, too, that may help you in this battle. Identifying plants. Particular areas may want to actually inventory trees on their private property as well as in the public right-of-way. And so just getting a handle on how many ash trees are in their own smaller communities would be a good idea. Again, sharing the information if people want to, treat and try to protect their tree, and do it where the timing is more appropriate before the trees become really heavily infested. Make sure they have access to those resources. And then, as a community, how can you help others by getting the word out about what's going to happen when you have ash trees that start to decline like these in this mobile home park, and how the impact, once those trees are removed, are going to be felt by the homeowners, the people in the mobile homes with, higher heating and cooling costs, and are there ways to be able to partner to actually plant some additional trees that will someday provide shade in these homes. The other thing is sometimes communities can work together, and it would have to be done on a local level, but often tree removal contracts are less when it's multiple trees in a given area rather than just one tree on an individual property owners. And so there are some communities that have kind of done some bulk purchasing as it relates to the ash removals, but it could probably also be done with chemical treatments. And so you have to have kind of that buy-in of the community to kind of lead those efforts. But that's, some possibilities, and I can hook you up with communities that have explored that and have had opportunities to do things like that. The individual trees, this is one of the larger trees in the city of Toledo that was identified. Since that tree's been removed and 2 new trees have been planted in its place. Again, diversity. The other thing when we're working with homeowners on private tree issues, if you have any creeks, rivers, ditches, or low areas that run through your community, you can see the high number of ash trees that are here that are going to have to be dealt with by the community, the homeowners, and in combination of those. Again, just a picture of a tree lost. 2 emerald ash borer removed from this person's site. There are some communities that have, and before actually even emerald ash borer, some hazard tree ordinances. So that may be something that you would want to look at as a community. It's not specifically geared just at ash trees that have been infested by emerald ash borer, but if there are hazard trees on private property that are deemed a threat to buildings, vehicles, they can be identified by a forester or somebody within that community. There are different ways that communities address that. One that I'm familiar with gives the homeowner a number of days to remove the tree. If that tree is not taken care of, they will either remove the tree, the community themselves, or have a private contractor remove the tree, and then the cost of that is billed. And sometimes it's just the exact cost. Sometimes it's a cost that's prorated to like 150% to really get people to try to remove the trees on their own. And sometimes that's put on their tax bills. So you can explore and look around to see what other communities are doing as it relates to their hazardous tree ordinances. The other thing that we've seen, especially with a lot of houses on the market and potentially working with realtors to make sure that if there are ash trees either in their buyer or seller's homes, that's kind of taken into consideration when there's an agreement to sell the houses. And the realtors have been really receptive and are eager to get that information out to their clientele. Just to kind of in follow-up or kind of tying everything together, replanting is really, really important, and hopefully the cost of removal of ash trees can be great. The cost of treating ash trees to maintain the canopy can be great, but if there are ways and sometimes they're creative ways, kind of adopting tree programs, but to get additional trees planted in your community, that can be written into the management plan. This is a private residence, but they've identified that they have ash trees. They're not infested yet, and so what they're doing is replanting other species, other diverse species, trying to give them a little bit of a head start before emerald ash borer actually attacks and causes decline in the trees. So they're trying to be proactive and really plan. So even homeowners that have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ash trees could actually develop their own management plan as it relates to emerald ash borer. It doesn't have to be a fancy document like your communities would develop. Maybe it's on the back of a napkin. But it's kind of just sitting down and talking with the residents in your community about what they want to do as it relates to emerald ash borer in their own landscapes. I had mentioned Sister Jeremias earlier, who was talking with Dan Herms in that photo. And this is kind of the floodplain area. There's a river that runs back here in between the buildings. And these are all plants that have been replanted in their emerald ash borer efforts. And so just an idea of the diversity and replanting and the importance of that. Okay. There. So you can see here with the pointer that Robin just pointed out here, you can see the replanting that occurred there, and some really good photo opportunities that I want to follow throughout the next few seasons as those trees begin to grow and develop and create their own forest. Again, an important component to an ash management plan would be the utilization. If you are going to remove trees as part of the plan, this is kind of a larger situation at one of the parks where they had a staging area and identified the trees in different lots. Sometimes the trees can be used for kind of more the high dollar utilization projects, wooden floors, furniture, and sometimes, depending on how long the trees have been standing, they can be used just as firewood, mulch, more kind of low-end values, some things with biomass. But know that there is a resource there, and check with other people in their communities on how they've dealt with the wood coming out of their communities. Just gives you some pictures. Portable sawmills. If you have that relationship already built in your community, that's wonderful. As you develop your plan, you may want to kind of seek out to see where there are portable sawmills. In Ohio, we have a directory, and I'm sure other states have something very similar with their wood products folks. But again, it's making those connections and hopefully doing it before emerald ash borer arrives so you can be prepared. Last week when Robin and I were at that session, there was a speaker from Maine, and I was very impressed with their task force that they've created. And one of the first things that task force did was to create a ban on firewood coming into the state. And so they're being very proactive, and it was really exciting that we're seeing this happen instead of being so reactive. Unfortunately, our states had to be because the insect was here before we knew it. So again, a lot of potential uses for that ash. This is a photo that Jessica Simons provided from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, where they utilized local wood in their community centers. Kind of a story that I'll kind of tie some loose ends here, but this is Mathi Botanical Gardens up in Ann Arbor, and they were ready to take down this tree right here, and as the chainsaws came out, there were some community members at the Arboretum and Botanical Gardens, and they were like, what are you doing? You can't do that. Look at how big this tree is. And I mean, it was already infested, and it was already, I think, totally dead. But they kind of, again, took that lemon that they were given and made lemonade and talked and highlighted about what they were going to use that wood for. And so if you can communicate that to your residents and try to get their buy-in, that, the infested trees have to come down because they can become a hazard. But if there's things that we can do with them, that makes it all the better. Just a plug for some of the other utilization opportunities for black ash specifically. This is some of the black ash baskets that were made and being passed on from generation to generation, and their concern with the Native Americans about the loss of the black ash tree. And so with that, it looks like we've got some questions on here that we can kind of scroll through. If you have additional questions or other things that you'd like to share, I know that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and the urban foresters that work in the regions across the state have worked really closely with Ohio communities in developing these management plans. And some of the communities actually are on their website, so you could actually view a template as well as localized plans to kind of, if you're kind of at a loss and need a starting point, don't recreate the wheel, but what's already out there. And so we've got a comment here. Are there any plans to tie in the threat of EAB and its control options with Arbor Day celebrations as way to get the word out more to the public? Great question, Tom. And in fact, I was at Stephanie Miller's Urban Forestry Tree City Awards program yesterday, and each of the communities that were there received some signage that they could put out either for Arbor Day, Earth Day, maybe Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week, which is later in May, beginning May 22nd this year. And so anything that you can tie in Emerald Ash Borer 2 that's already existing, it doesn't create a lot of additional work, but again, it gets that word out, especially in communities that maybe aren't dealing with Emerald Ash Borer right now. And so good point there. The Cleveland Metro Parks has volunteers, including Tom, GPS mapping ash trees along paved trails in a few of the metro parks. Very good. And so great way to utilize volunteers and get the community involved. Let's see. The website for the slide for Michigan.
Are you talking, I think she's talking about the ash utilization. I think that's what Debbie is looking for.
Okay. If, again, I have all these kind of in my favorites on my computer and not memorized, but any kind of search engine. Oh.
I'm just going to put down your, if you wanted talking, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, that's the wood utilization in southeastern Michigan, RC&D, or Jessica Simons. You'll get right to her website.
I wanted to let you know as well that there are management plans also on the emeraldashborer.info site if you have want to look at some samples that have been written. So I know that was a question. So we have a lot of silly band questions.
Yeah, I'm just, what is the cost of the silly bands? There are two different prices. Some of the states actually purchase the individual adult beetle, which runs about 15 cents depending on the number of silly bands you purchase. The actual set of the 5 silly bands that are packaged together, that cost is about 75 cents. Okay, I'm going to just scroll up here to see if I missed any questions. Oh, I think we got them all. So if you're from a community that has an existing management plan that they're pretty proud of, that currently isn't on the emeraldashborer.info website, or would like other people to learn from your experiences, please forward that to Robin, and she will make sure that that gets updated on the website. And we don't want anybody having to recreate the wheel, and if we can learn and glean information from each other, that's really what's important.
I saw the question from Indy Ash about the average cost of treatment for a tree. I think that it's really difficult to give an average. It depends, of course, on the size of the tree, what type of treatment you're looking at, or if you're deciding to take it down. Those are all questions you're probably going to have to get from your from the resources that you have in your community. Okay, thank you, Brad, also for your comment. There, most of those management plans are for, just as an example. So, like you say, there are some that have been updated and others haven't. But a lot of times, if you get online and just Google Emerald Ash Borer management plans, you will come up with a quite a list that you can look at. That because communities are developing these every day, as far as I've seen. So, especially the more states that are dealing with emerald ash borer, the more you see folks putting these together for their communities.
That's a good point, Brad, to make sure that those plans are dated, because you'll want to, it's not one thing that you'll create the plan and it'll just kind of sit there. It's something that you'll want to bring out and kind of reevaluate as you go through the process, and by changing that date to make sure that people are aware of when the last time it was looked at or reviewed would be very important.
I know there was a question about photos from previous webinars. Unfortunately, the webinars that are recorded, you aren't going to be able to take photos off of those webinars, but what you'll need to do is ask the presenter of the webinar, and usually there's some contact information available on those webinars that you can get a hold of that presenter and ask them to either send you that particular slide or that particular photo. Are there any other questions?
We'll get busy and get working on that community management plan. And if you have any questions, like always, don't hesitate to send us an email or give us a phone call. And with that, which you're all eagerly awaiting for, if you want SAF or ISA credits today, just make sure that you send me an email message. I think I'm almost up to date on all of the past presentations, so I am going to go through my file once more to make sure that everything was sent out to people, so I will be double checking that. But in the subject line, make sure that you put SAF or ISA credit along with today's date to kind of help me keep those in the correct file. And then if for some reason you don't need the actual credit from ISA or SAF, but need documentation that you were on today's session, you could just send me an email and I can send kind of just a general certificate